Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Point and this evening's full council meeting. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Mayor of Eastleigh, Councillor Nick Couldry, and as Mayor I chair this meeting. Now, before we start, we're going to have some housekeeping points, which don't surprise anyone. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if it happens, it's real. Please leave the building through the fire exits and meet outside at the fire assembly point, and officers will direct any evacuation necessary. This meeting is being recorded on video and will be uploaded onto the Council's YouTube channel. If any members of the public prefer not to be recorded, then please contact a member of staff. And if you or anyone here is planning on filming the meeting, please let us know so that we can ensure that you're not filming members of the public who don't wish to be filmed. And of course, the Chair reserves the right to ask any filming considered to be intrusive to be stopped. More information is on the Council website. Right, let's start. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have apologies from Councillors Baker, Bicknell, Cause, Mann, Parker-Jones and Reynolds.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public participation, but there's currently no public participation about items that are not on the agenda. So we go on and move to the Mayor's announcements, and I'm afraid it's with great sadness that I advise that our colleague Zoe Vaughan, who's City Communications Officer for the One Horton Heath project, passed away suddenly 10 days ago following a medical injury. The loss of a member of the EBC family is always hard to bear, but particularly so when it happens in service. Zoe was known best to those of us who are close to the One Horton Heath project, but tributes to her have come from many different quarters, both inside and outside council. Borough councillors, parish councillors, present and former staff, contractors, and others. I'm sure you will have noticed the tributes to Zoe from her manager, Will Purvis, and the chief executive, James Strawn, in last week's councillors' update. Councillors, this news is upsetting, but we can be sure that the council will do Zoe's memory proud by continuing to serve residents as well as we possibly can, and looking after each other in every way. When the details of the funeral and a planned charity collection in her memory are available, they'll be shared with you. Please would you join with me in a short moment of reflection in memory of Zoe. Thank you. It's customary for the Mayor to give an overview of the civic calendar. First of all, I should say that in the new year I was delighted to hear that 2 borough residents have been recognised in the King's Birthday's honours. Simon Ayres, the Chief Executive of Trustmark, was awarded the member of the Order of the British Empire Medal for services to consumer protection. And Jean Robert Jones was awarded a British Empire Medal for services to the community during the pandemic. We're very proud of them and their achievements. We recently sent the borough's best wishes for a speedy recovery to His Majesty the King following his cancer diagnosis. Since our last council meeting in November, the Mayoress and I have enjoyed attending engagements around the borough. There were lots of Christmas events, which included a celebration at the Eastleigh Community Garden, Christmas Eve carols at Eastleigh Baptist Church. Recent events have included Chinese New Year celebrations and the Indo-Pak Food Festival yesterday. It involved a bit of eating for Eastleigh. We have to look quite a lot to look forward to in the last few months for my mayoral year. Another lunch for the AWCA community, Hilton Dog Show, Ryan and Fantasia, and May Day Fair at the Itchen Valley Country Park. There's a quiz and curry night at the Concord Club on the 7th of May, in aid of my charity appeal, which is raising money for Eastleigh Citizens Advice. And I hope those of you who will be able to join me and support this local charity who are doing excellent work to help our residents. Right, in respect to declarations of interest, councillors, you are reminded that you must declare any personal or pecuniary interest in accordance with the council's code of conduct and standing orders. Do any councillors have any interest to declare? Councillor Tidridge.
Thank you. I'd just like to declare an interest in the exempt item by nature of my employment. Thank you.
Thank you. There doesn't seem to be anything else. Councillors, next we need to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the council meeting held on the 27th of November last year. May I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you. Are there any questions relating to the accuracy of the minutes? Is there any debate? Can I ask all those who are for? Any against? So that's unanimous. Next item on the agenda is the leaders' report, but I'm told there's no leaders' report this time. So we move on to the general fund revenue budget for 2023-24 and 24-25, and the medium-term financial plan between 2023-4 and 2028-9. Councillors are reminded that the budget debate process is outlined on a separate document in your agenda packs, which has also been emailed to you. Hard copies in your desk on pink paper. And please can I draw your attention to the notes at the bottom of the page, which details the time limits for the proposer of other amendments to 10 minutes and all other speeches to 5 minutes. The traffic light system will be used when appropriate, and a verbal reminder that there's a 30 seconds remaining will also be given by the Chief Executive if necessary. Recommendations from the Cabinet were contained in a supplementary agenda pack published on Friday and which are on your desks on the green paper. In line with the process set out, we would usually commence with public participation, but on this occasion nobody is registered to speak, and I now call on the Leader of the Council to propose the item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move and I'll speak to the paper when seconded. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And apologies, colleagues, for a somewhat raspy throat. If I manage to get through this without at least 3 beakers full of water, that'll be good going. But it's quite short, I reassure you. So that's the bit of good news this evening. Can I, perhaps before getting started, just also put on record my commentary on Zoe Warren. So it's very, very tragic to lose a member of staff in service, and also someone so young and who was clearly really dedicated to the project that she was working on and working really well with the team. And I'm sure all our thoughts, as you said, Mr. Mayor, are with Zoe's family and all those members of staff that worked with Zoe in a relatively short time with Eastleigh. It really is tragic. Mr. Mayor, these are troubled times for local government across the country, but here again in Eastleigh we're able to set the balanced budget without impacting our core services and keeping our council tax below inflation for the 21st year running. And that really isn't the case everywhere. Sometimes we can be lulled into a false sense of security here in Eastleigh. An increasing number of councils are operating under Section 114 notices. That mean they can only continue with essential spending. And along with several councillors here this evening, I sat through the sobering experience of Hampshire County Council's budget last Thursday. And there, just again give you some context of our position, even after removing £772 million of annual spending from local services over recent years, and taking £50 million from reserves last year, and another £74 million from reserves this coming year. For the second year running, Hampshire has had its largest ever increase in council tax at £72.99, and a recurring unfunded budget deficit of nearly £42 million, with reserves that can't sustain that draw again next year. That context is, I think, really important for how we approach our budget. Next door to us in Southampton, the council there is having to request special help and support from the government as it reduces its discretionary spend further. The leader and chief executive have both in recent times called time on their roles. No reflection on them either. And I make all these comments in support of our neighbours, certainly not to throw stones. Local government is in a perilous state after 14 years of rationing cuts from Rishi Sunak and his predecessors, all backed every step of the way by Conservative MPs across the country and across the county, and here too in Eastleigh. We need to remember where responsibility lies for these cuts to public sector services. Almost every county council is in much the same position as Hampshire, either 1, 2 or 3 years away from bankruptcy. Almost every other unitary council is in the same position, or sometimes marginally better position, but they're able to raid and close down what would have been considered district council services in a way that Eastleigh residents have a degree of protection because we're not part of a unitary authority sharing services with upper tier services for adult and children's care. Even after George Osborne's extended and unnecessary years of austerity continued years beyond the 2009 financial crisis, if we think ourselves back just 8 years, before the Brexit referendum, before the pandemic, before the disaster of Trussonomics, I doubt anyone here today would have predicted the perilous state we now find wider local government. It is shocking, it really is. So that's the background against which we debate and agree our budget this evening. And I would, as is traditional, but it is heartfelt, like to thank, of course, all of the staff team, given the otherwise thankless job of being forced to manage an otherwise unsustainable position. Our finance team do a remarkable job monitoring and adjusting to the national change in interest rates, to rules and regulations, in an environment where almost every council has incomplete audits due to the national failure of the audit system. The report before councillors this evening, considered by Policy and Performance Scrutiny Panel and by Cabinet, shows a net general fund requirement of just over £13 million this coming year, financed primarily from council tax, but also from nationally set business grants and from government grant. We have managed to absorb a substantial national staff pay award, a decline in income from energy generation, and also a decline in income from planning fees due to the downturn in the housing market, and also managed a tight labour market. We are, of course, still having to make a range of savings, but we're also projecting a reduction in fuel costs, income from new property lettings, and additional income at Itchen Valley Country Park. But going forward, unless interest rates decline faster than with current projections, we anticipate having to make net savings through reducing expenditure and increasing income of £2 million to set the budget this time next year, rising higher into the future. We have been here before. It is worth saying that. Several times over the last few decades, and we've always managed to meet the challenge. It will be difficult, but we will succeed, and in doing so, that will avert the difficulties seen elsewhere in other councils around the country. Along the way, we'll need to look closely at maximising income from our property assets, noting the trend away from office occupancy evidenced in provincial areas since the pandemic, and where appropriate, we will look at alternative uses or disposals to make the needed adjustments. If that all sounds gloomy, well, yes, it is. And it's fair and right to say that. But in amongst that despondency and relative relief for us compared to others, depending on how you perceive our position compared with others, let's also celebrate some of what we've been able to continue to achieve. And there's a couple of lists here, but they're worth saying because it sets into context that we haven't given up. We've still got ambition. Just think about some of the things that we've achieved in the last year across a range of services and projects. We purchased the first electric waste bin lorries in Hampshire. We provided a new facility for young people to replace Free Space Skate Park in Eastleigh. We worked with Berwick and Horton Heath Parish Council on the community cafe and splash pad at New Century Park. We completed the development of Bampton House in Chandler's Ford that provides 13 temporary flats for vulnerable residents. Homelessness is a national problem. Additional temporary accommodation really matters. We opened new play areas at Kingfisher Park in Bursleden and Chartsdale Park at Borley Green. We approved plans for 103 hectares, that's 250 acres in old money, of green space on farmland at Stoke Park Farm in Bishopstoke. We established coffee pod recycling. I don't know anything about coffee pods, but apparently we now recycle them, and we're the only scheme in Hampshire. We completed a series of walking trails on the Hamble Peninsula. We extended the size of Fleming Park Paddling Pool, our popular free facility. We worked in partnership with Hendy to complete new showrooms on Lee Road in Eastleigh, helping to create and sustain jobs for our economy. And along the way, we refurbished Eastleigh bus station toilets and added new seating, litter bins and lighting. That's just a quick snapshot of a few of the things that are listed on the council tax bills when they come out, the things that we've achieved over the last year. But let's also look to the future and what we'll achieve in the coming year, because the list is equally interesting and equally impressive. We'll complete work on £3.3 million of capital improvements to Itchen Valley Country Park, including new paths and trails and a new community building. We'll complete the Avenue Link Road from Burnett's Lane to Allington Lane to take traffic away from Central Fair Oak. We'll complete the redevelopment of the old post office in Easter Town Centre with new homes for local people. We'll upgrade the footpath and cycleway to Hedge End Station to Bubble Lane and create an environmental maintenance plan for the Cheltenham Gardens Pond in Grange Park. Local things for local people that matter. We'll complete work on the new ground source heat pump scheme for the first homes at One Horton Heath to provide green energy instead of gas. We'll install new artwork at Hatch Farm in West End. We'll commence work on new homes at Hands Way and Nightingale Avenue in Eastleigh. We'll create tree and bee corridors in Ferrick and Bishopstoke for enhanced biodiversity. We'll promote additional music, community, comedy and arts events at the Berry Theatre and here at the Point in Eastleigh. We'll continue to roll out more EV charging points across the borough. We'll install new National Lottery funded public art at Hiltonbury Recreation Ground. And we'll work with the Newt Conservation Partnership, beat that, to create a new habitat for great crested newts at Stoke Park. That's a pretty ambitious list for a medium-sized district council in times of still local government austerity. And we do so with at One Horton Heath, the most extensive council-led plan for a new community in the country, based on gas-free renewable energy, 50% green space, sustainable urban drainage, and a quality of place that will mark it out with housing of all tenures to be truly exceptional. Given the report today in front of the government from the Competitions Authority on collusion within the property sector and the dumbing down of new housing stock, we'll be standing out from the crowd and standing out from the crowd for the right ways. So when all councillors get a chance to see work on site this summer, when the new Avenue Link Road is complete, I think you'll be amazed as those of us who've already been down on site on a regular basis, as Councillor Corbyn and I routinely are as part of the One Horton Heath project. And so I take no notice of siren voices from Tory MPs about housing development. Housing is needed for all, and we will use our new community to help force the quality of housing market up to our standard, not dumbed down to the volume builder standard. So, Mr. Mayor, I conclude already with a message of hope. We've witnessed more than a decade of decline in local public services thanks to Rishi Sunak, his predecessors in number 10, and his Conservative MPs, including the Conservative MPs for our borough. They have 10 ears on public services, other than when they can award profitable contracts to Tory donors who then end up in the House of Lords. The mantra of Liz Truss's popular conservatism, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? And the threat of votes drifting off to Reform, to Labour in the red wall, and the Liberal Democrats in the blue wall, is all that drives this government in its dying days. So is there hope? There must be an election between now and our next budget. I call that a time of hope. We must lay responsibility for the destruction of public services where the blame rests, and that is with our Conservative members of Parliament. There really is no hope for Sunak's Conservatives, and I despair that anyone in this theatre, would want this shambolic, tin-eared government to be re-elected. Endless NHS waiting lists and waits for GP appointments, the cost of living crisis continuing for many, even sewage still dumped in our rivers and our streams. Frankly, there's not much hope from a cautious and risk-averse Starmer government either. This is no 1997. It may not be that things can only get better, but they could hardly be worse. Let's all hope, then, that these final months of a Conservative government that simply delivers despair are the final few months. Things need to get better. Local government across the country needs to be re-empowered. We need to deliver hope. Within 11 months, we'll have had a general election. Let's start with some hope for our country, for our borough. We, collectively, staff and councillors at East Borough Council, are up for that challenge. I know it. We've been here before, we've risen to it, and we will succeed. And so, Mr. Mayor, I move the budget resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's no amendments. There's a single debate now. Anybody speak? Councillor Tidridge.
Thank you. I'm giving a response, as you've probably noted, Councillor Parker-Jones and Councillor Cawes aren't here tonight, so I'm giving a response on behalf of the three of us. We're not proposing any amendments this year, or as we have preferred to describe them in previous years, enhancements. The SIPFA review and the Ernst & Young external audit report both highlighted issues that the Council is working to resolve, including capacity and assets and internal audit. We are very pleased to see that the budget is stated to be consistent with the best value notice served on this Council. Like every local authority, this Council faces challenges, and the report states that savings are still needed. The independent group is really concerned that this is going to be challenging when this report highlights that so many costs are increasing significantly. We hope that as much as possible will be done to minimise the impact on our community. Addressing commercial property voids is a good example. If the Council divests itself of a commercial property, there's a real risk that it may be converted into housing under permitted development, bypassing the checks and requirements that the planning process would bring. There have been many examples of this, including one in EC Town Centre. Working to reduce the risk of unintended negative consequences for our community, including that of poor quality housing, is really important. I know that many of you here share that desire. Paragraph 65 in the budget report addresses some of the issues raised in the Treasury Management Report, and it highlights that this Council is a net borrower and that it is sensitive to interest rates. Paragraph 66 shows how interest payable is to be £16.6 million this year at 5.43%. It also shows that borrowing is set to increase, 306 million going up to 417 million for 2028/9. The interest payable in 28/9 is shown to be 12.5 million, but if this year's interest rate is used, that will be 22.6 million if those figures are as forecasted. I'm sure that along with every resident with a mortgage, the Council hopes that interest rates will come down. Perhaps in future tables like those shown could show a range of possibilities, which would also be congruent with one of the conclusions of the Ernst & Young report for reports to members. We hope that this council will be working to follow the recommendations it has received to improve transparency to members with regards to financial decisions. But my big takeaway from the budget this year is I really hope that the unintended consequence of addressing costs is not a detriment to our community. But as I said earlier, I'm confident that everybody in this room probably shares that desire. Thank you.
Sorry. Any other debate? Councillor Court?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting the budget proposal this evening, clearly, and I'd like to add my thanks to the finance team and Sarah and others for providing once again a balanced budget. Other councils, as Keith has already mentioned, would be very happy to be delivering this year. An awful lot won't be. Also for making themselves available to discuss the budget up until up over the busy budgeting period for members to ask their questions. Eastleigh remains in a relatively strong and healthy financial position. The effects of the Tory failed trustonomic experiment just 18 months ago, it's hard to believe it's only 18 months ago, also are still being felt by mortgage payers and renters. Indeed, every family and resident in the borough. These are not ordinary times. The budget report acknowledges these are not ordinary times as well, and shows that we at Eastleigh are not somehow immune on either cost or income side of the budget. And those macroeconomic factors affecting every one of our residents, the effects of the cost of living crisis, which may well be peddled as reducing in terms of headline inflation figures, really aren't being felt by Eastleigh residents, with prices and costs still well in excess of what we saw previously, and still rising too fast. That's the same for the council, the challenges on both income and cost sides of the budget, as Keith has already mentioned. I particularly support our commitment to once again provide a below inflation council tax settlement for Eastleigh residents for Eastleigh's part. This has never been more important and should be unanimously supported this evening, I hope. It's also worth pointing out that Eastleigh actually receives an average of just shy of £142 a year. We do an awful lot with that. 21 years of consistent and responsible budget for council taxpayers adds up. Over many years we've sought alternative ways of funding services when income from government has been decimated. During that period this council has, despite what some would say, had prudency at the very forefront of those plans and as detailed in the paper before us, setting aside reserves in the good times to be used when times get tough. That has meant those reserves are being used as intended to fund increased interest rates, property void periods in our commercial investment portfolio. But the reserves are doing their job. But they are finite, and sooner we can get back to adding to them, the better. We're not immune either on the cost side of the budget. We exist in a big world out there, and we need to be responsible and prudent while still making Eastleigh a better place to live. Providing our residents with, among other things, tidy streets, green spaces, healthy and popular activities, and homes, most importantly, which all can aspire to live in, whether as buyers or renters, movers or first-time homemakers. I see that firsthand. My son bought his first house at the end of last year, and it is really, really important, and so many people are just do not have that hope. A balanced budget and a healthy general fund reserve is before us tonight, despite all of the above and more. It should also be noted that the medium-term financial plan being forecast isn't just written and put in a drawer. There is and will be much more work to do, as Keith has already mentioned, making sure we run as efficiently as possible, proactively managing council business as opportunities and threats arise. That is being responsible, that is being prudent, and I hope the budget will be supported by all members this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, do we move to a vote? Or do we lead the sums up? Right.
Well, just a very brief reply, Mr. Mayor, because there's only a couple of speakers to reply to. I think Ian uses the words responsible and prudent, and they're absolutely right. Prudent was perhaps an overused word by Gordon Brown, but even he in his own way was prudent, for some of the time at least. But we have been over many years, and it's that caution, that prudency, that carefulness that has meant that we've been able to manage our budget without totally slashing and burning council services over recent years, and the very substantial income that we've received, albeit it's dropped quite a bit, and we still receive from commercial property. It's been a critical part of that. So I want to reassure Councillor Tidridge on the points that she raised, because they're all perfectly reasonable points to raise. Jin says that this is a challenging budget. Yes, it is a challenging budget. It will be more challenging next year. I'm not expecting there to be a pot of gold at the end of the election rainbow. I think we're going to have tough times for a few years, and all of local government's going to have a tough time for a few years, because any incoming government of whatever complexion has got a lot of work to do to get the public sector back up and running, and do that at the same time as still delivering economic stability across the country for all, and tackle climate change at the same time. These are tough asks for any new government. So, challenging, yes. I think the context matters, which is that we were basically given a clean bill of health by SIPFA. The government commissioned these reports into several councils, and I think the government was expecting that they were going to come back with all sorts of troubles and traumas, and they didn't come back with troubles and traumas here. They gave us some positive recommendations of things that we could do better. We're always open to ideas for things that we can do better, because we're a learning council. But basically, they gave us a clean bill of health. Jane also mentions about the risk of property disposals leading to developers going on rampage and doing inappropriate things. We're not going to let that happen. If we choose to take a view that we will dispose of any office property that could be converted for residential, we will either do that job ourselves and then dispose, or we'll make sure we get appropriate controls along the way, because some places have seen very inappropriate conversions from office to residential with poor housing standards, lack of amenity space, and on, and that is just not our bag. We wouldn't be going to the trouble and trauma of reopening our housing revenue account if we wanted to be a dodgy landlord. We're doing it because we want to be a better landlord, and we want to, I will use this phrase once, and I only use it once because it's appropriate in this setting as opposed to all the nonsense we get from government, because we do want to level up the standard of housing landlords in our area, where we don't have the institutional investment that's the case in London and Manchester and some of the other larger cities. So that really is important. And so far as interest rates, the report accurately suggests the best argument, or most likely outcome of interest rate movements predicted by Iron Close, our Treasury advisors. But clearly there is a range. They could be higher, they could be lower. The central case is what's projected here. It looks to be pretty prudent compared to where most of the markets are pointing interest rates at. But we've also taken, again, the cautious and prudent view of converting more of our unfixed borrowing onto fixed borrowing through the Public Works Loan Board to again, maximise the protection, minimise the uncertainty, and be prudent and cautious with public sector money, because that's the right thing for us to do. And that, I think, just about sums it up in, I think, the shortest budget debate we've had in probably at least the last 40 years since I've been monitoring them in one form or another. So thank you, colleagues, for that, and for saving my voice. It's a tough budget. We're doing the right things. We're doing it the right way. There are challenges ahead, but we must still retain our ambition. Our job is to improve the quality of life for Eastleigh residents. It's not just about delivering statutory services at the minimum possible level, which is what many councils are now having to do. That confidence we can inject into this process and say, we're up for this challenge. This budget does that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We now move on to the vote. A recorded vote, so I'll leave you to conduct it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, if you could indicate the way you wish to vote. Councillor Asman.
For.
Councillor Attrell. Councillor Beer. Councillor Bourne.
For.
Councillor Broadhurst. Councillor Breamfield. Councillor Corbyn. Councillor Caldry, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Craig. Councillor Cross. Councillor Dedier. Councillor De Croo. Councillor Dougard. Councillor Garton. Councillor Gomer. Councillor Hadaway, Councillor Holes, Councillor Holland, Councillor House, Councillor Irish, Councillor Jarvis, Councillor Kinlock, Councillor Curl, Councillor Marsh, Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Park, Councillor Pragnall, Councillor Pretty, Councillor Spencer, Councillor Tennant, Councillor Tidridge, and Councillor Welsh. That's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the council tax resolutions for 2024-25. The report was published in a supplementary agenda pack on the 19th of February. May I have a mover, please?
Move as printed, Mr. Mayor.
And is the motion seconded? Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Is there any debate? There doesn't seem to be any debate, but there is going to be a recorded vote on the item. So, again, let's have a quick on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Asman, Councillor Attrell, Councillor Beer, Councillor Bourne, Councillor Broadhurst, Councillor Bringfield, Councillor Corbyn, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Craig, Councillor Cross, Councillor Dedier, Councillor De Croo, Councillor Dogood, Councillor Garton, Councillor Gomer, Councillor Hadaway, Councillor Holes, Councillor Holland, Councillor House, Councillor Irish, Councillor Jarvis, Councillor Kinlock, Councillor Curl, Councillor Marsh, Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Park, Councillor Pragnall, Councillor Pretty, Councillor Spencer, Councillor Tennant, Councillor Tidridge, Councillor Welsh. That's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We now have the Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategy. The recommendations for Cabinet were sent as a supplementary agenda on the 23rd of February and are on peach paper on your desks. Councillors are reminded that appendices 1C and 3A are exempt. So if any councillor wishes to raise anything in these, we will have to use the next item to move into private session. Does any councillor want to discuss anything in the confidential appendices? No. Then we can move on with the debate. May I have a mover, please?
I'll move as printed, Mr. Mayor.
Seconded. Any debate? There doesn't seem to be any debate at all. So can I have those in favour? And those against? And any abstentions?
That's carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Move to item 12. And this is the appointment of independent cooperative members to the Audit and Resources Committee. May I have a mover, please?
I'll move, Mr. Mayor, with a slight adjustment to the recommendation. If I explain this now before getting a second, that hopefully will speed things up. This is a good idea, that was suggested to us by our peer review from the Local Government Association in terms of strengthening the independence of audit. We were very happy to take it up. In fact, we started the process of recruiting to these roles even before the LGA report hit the desks here, because we thought it was a good idea, it was worth doing, and therefore we have a process here. And I'd like to thank those that were part of the process of doing the recruitment. One thing that has been pointed out to me since the report was published is that, generally speaking, for what are effectively like non-executive director appointments, you usually appoint them in such a way that they don't have the same end date, so that one retires before the next one, even though you can reappoint the one that has the shorter period to them. So they go in a revolving circle, but generally speaking don't do more than 2 terms, because otherwise they get too close to the organisation and they lose their independence. So what I'm going to move, and this was just a a toss of a coin. I'm going to move that we give a 2-year term to Mr. Pellegrini, and a 4-year term to Mr. Royal, and the 2-year term can be renewed at the end of 2 years, obviously subject to both sides being content. And likewise, the 4-year term can be renewed by either side, subject to everyone being happy. But that will give that ability to have revolving appointments, so we don't end up with 2 people falling off the system at the same time, hopefully, at any point in the future. This is a novel experiment for us. The hope is very much that it gives a bit of added weight to the scrutiny function on financial issues, and both the characters here have got good experience in the territory, either through management or through audit or through accountancy or through both, and hopefully they'll add that value. I also hope it's a bit of a prod to our councillors to be prepared to give Steve a harder time, because he wants a harder time as chair of audit, and that's very much your job as a committee to make happen. He's nodding, probably because we've got an alternative. But if that means the meeting's a bit longer and they're a bit more probing, all the better for it. What we may end up having to do is just make sure the business is regulated so the committee views the stuff it really needs to see, as opposed to everything. But that's a matter for Steve to work through. So I'll move the recommendations with that minor change, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Rather than go through a formal secondment, can I have a seconder for the motion as amended? Thank you. Do you want to speak now?
If I may, Mr. Mayor. Councillor House has summed it up pretty well, actually, but I just wanted to add my thanks to Laura Johnson and Sarah King and Jim Tidridge from the committee who formed the panel with me. We've got 2 excellent candidates. We had some very good interviews, actually, and I'm happy with what we've decided, and I know that the gentlemen are both very keen to get going, which is great. And I think the rolling period staggered is quite useful, because it means that we've always got one independent member who's established and on the committee, and it very much makes sense. So I will happily second the position.
Thank you. Is there any debate? No debate, so I think we then move to the vote. Can I have those in favour of the amended resolution? And against?
That's carried unanimously, Mr. Mayor.
We next move on to item 13, which is the approval of the suspension of councillor attendance rules. Councillor, may I take this opportunity to send Councillor Mann our best wishes, but I do need a mover, please.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the recommendations here, and just to add a bit of extra explanation, because you may well see Darshan online at online meetings, and he'll still be doing casework by email and everything else. But his medical condition means that he needs to be in a degree of isolation for a period. And that means we can see him online, but we can't physically get him into a room. And the rules that the government have set out mean that we can't have online voting or formal online attendance for formal meetings. And so we have what we have here. It doesn't mean Darshan's disappearing. It doesn't mean he's not doing any work. It just means he physically can't get to meetings for a period. And we hope that within 6 months he'll be back physically in the room with us. So I move the recommendations as here, Mr. Mayor. And again, wish him all our best.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Is there any debate? Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I'd like to wish my friend and colleague Darshan well in his treatment and a speedy recovery. Eastleigh Safe residents can rest assured that Councillor Bicknell and myself will ensure that all casework and ongoing casework will get handled along with Darshan dealing with it, and they'll still get their focuses delivered eventually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Is there anybody else who wants? So we move on to a vote. All those in favour? Are those against? Any abstentions?
That's carried unanimously, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Item 14 relates to Mr Wood. And the position arises because in 2014 it was agreed to recognise the public service of former members of the council who have retired from office by introducing the title of Honorary Alderman. This title is awarded to former members who served for 12 years or more since 1974-75 and are not actively seeking re-election. Past Mayor Roger Wood served as a councillor from 1964 to 1982. As his years of service started before the local government reorganisation in 1974, he wasn't technically awarded an Alderman Award, but clearly he did the same service as everyone was, so I propose that we rectify this and present him with an Alderman Award at the mayor-making ceremony on the 20th of May. May I have a mover, please?
I move, Mr Mayor, and can briefly speak to this item. For anyone who was a councillor back in 1982, they would have had a very different budget meeting. That's the one we've had this evening. Councillor Irish is the only one here who can possibly remember back that time for various reasons, but in those days, and most of you won't even be aware of this, every item that came before council from every committee was a recommended item, not a resolved item. So if you can imagine, if we update it, all those items from the area committees over the last few months, and all those items from cabinet over the last few months, would have come here as recommended items to be re-debated and re-voted on. And that meant that when the budget debate was finished, or indeed most controversial debates, it would be 3 or 4 in the morning. So we should think ourselves lucky and give due respect to Roger Wood, having managed to cope with 18 years in that environment back from 1964 to 1982. Very happy to propose this award, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Is there any debate? Councillor Irish.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, as Councillor House says, there was dark days back in 1982 when we came out of the council chamber in Lee Road at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I do remember Roger really well. He was on the old borough council before we had local government reorganisation. He's an extremely nice chap, and he worked really hard on the council, so I'm really pleased to see him getting this honorary alderman. Well deserved.
Thank you. Is there any other debate? Right, well, I think we move on to the vote. Can I have those in favour, please? Those against? Any abstentions?
That's carried unanimously, Mr Mayor.
We now move on to statements and questions. We have a motion, and can I invite Councillor Jarvis to move her motion? You've got 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are 6,310 women in Eastleigh who were affected by maladministration by the Department for Work and Pensions in its handling of the state pension age increase for women born in the 1950s. I have met many of the WASPI women, and they have told me how it has had a profound effect on their lives and their families, as well as the impact on our local communities. This motion affirms support for all the women across Eastleigh who have been impacted by this maladministration and urges the government to make fair and fast compensation for the lack of fair notice the affected women were given over changes to their state pension age, which has resulted in serious financial losses and sustained damage to their mental health and well-being. For those who are not aware of the background to this injustice, in 1995 the then government legislated to increase the women's state pension age from 60 to 65 by April 2020. Yet in the years following, these changes were not communicated to the affected women. In fact, most only received notice of a change after the state pension age was raised again by the Pensions Act of 2011. Women born in the 1950s, some 3.8 million of them across the UK, were victims of what the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman branded maladministration. Some women were 58 years old before they found out that they could only retire at 66 and not 60, leaving many in financial hardship. Incredibly, the DWP website was still stating that women got their pensions at age 60 as late as 2016. Maladministration was confirmed in 2021, but over 250,000 women across the UK have died since the WASPI campaign was launched in 2018 without ever receiving compensation. Many WASPI women here in Eastleigh face daily challenges. They have been seriously impacted by the cost of living crisis, experiencing debt and struggling to meet their housing costs or pay their energy bills or buy food and basic essentials, which of course has a knock-on impact. Those who would have retired and engaged in caring responsibilities for grandchildren or older relatives or partners, or perhaps volunteered with local organisations and charities, have had no choice but to continue working. The final report from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman on whether the women who were affected by this maladministration should get compensation is expected in March or April. It beggars belief that they have had to wait so long, and even then it will be up to the DWP to decide if it will follow any recommendations. The courage and dignity of the WASPI women is incredibly humbling, and every woman in Eastleigh affected by this deserves our support in their fight for fair and fast compensation. Councillors, I hope you will support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Marsh.
I'd like to second this motion, but can I reserve the right to speak, please?
Of course. Any debate? I think Councillor Marsh, you're on.
I think that was... Oh, David.
Councillor Corbyn first.
Sorry. I was expecting some more people to speak, actually. I think we should be really angry about this, Mr. Mayor. This has taken far too long, and it is a national disgrace. This has been talked about for many, many years, and government just need to sort it out. So whatever we can do, I absolutely support this motion, and we should be really, really angry about this, because there are people out there that lives have been ruined. I'm not sure we are angry, if I'm honest, Mr. Mayor, but I am.
Thank you. Councillor Garton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As a woman born in the 50s, I totally understand what these women are campaigning for, and to be part of that. It is totally wrong and totally out of order that having to wait all these years. But for goodness sake, let's look at the record of what's been happening. Look at the people, the sub-postmasters and mistresses have been waiting for years for their compensation and to get their convictions overturned. It just isn't good enough. Just to say, really, if I'm allowed to say it, that the government just needs to get its finger out and just sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tidridge.
Thank you. Absolutely support this motion, and really just echoing Councillor Garton in terms of I really wish that this was an isolated incident, that it was just one example, so that it was the only example of this government not doing what it should do, doing the right thing by people who've been subjected to a grave miscarriage of justice. It's the postal workers. I was also listening to the situation that those with haemophilia who were infected with AIDS, again, waiting. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. This particular instance, I feel there's a contract between government and the community. We're all encouraged to have a pension. We're encouraged to plan for our retirement. How the heck can you plan for your retirement when the goalposts get changed when it's too late to do anything about it? It's appalling. And so absolutely support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Tray.
Yeah, I'm very happy to support this motion as well. Just in the last few weeks, I've actually met some older ladies using food banks, and I think the use of food banks is an absolute disgrace. But when they should be actually enjoying retirement and being able to do what they want, not actually going to food banks, I think it definitely something that needs done.
Thank you, Councillor Craig. Councillor Broomfield.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I did contact the monitoring officer to suggest I should abstain on this vote as my wife is in that age category. I'm reliably informed that I can talk and vote on this, so I'd just like to say I am supporting the motion, but I do want to make it clear I'm doing it on my own behalf, not on my wife's say-so. I am my own man in my own house. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broomfield. Councillor Marsh, do you want to?
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the councillors who already said they'll support this motion. I think for me, this case is about yet another injustice. Women fought for equality. Women fought for parity. And women accept that increasing the age of the pension is par for the course. And not many people would say that's not fair. And most of us would be saying fair play. If we want everything else to be equal, so should the pension age. But maladministration is the big issue here. And I think you do only have to say those simple words, post office scandal, to really sum up one of the many failings in the system, or with the system, and government failure to support these people. This is a group of women who fought hard for what they earned, and they were cheated, and the goalposts did change, and it's not right, and it is yet another injustice that has led to significant hardship, mental health-wise, well-being-wise, families that were devastated where women had planned their retirements and suddenly couldn't afford to be retired. None of these women who've worked so hard for all their lives should be going to a food bank. And yet again, our government is failing to act to support. For an ombudsman to have found that there has been a maladministration and compensation to not be provided is yet another scandal. I think the one significant difference is these women haven't managed to get a documentary made about themselves and get the support of the nation behind them. But considering we haven't got the support of the rest of the nation behind them, we can at least get the full support of this entire council behind them. The government has failed these ladies, and it's time that we stepped up and fought for them to get justice. And I think Councillor Jarvis stated the words, they need fair and fast compensation. It's no good waiting until they've all died off and say, oops, sorry. The time is now for them to act, and therefore I think we need to support this motion, and certainly has my full backing. And I hope that our little part that we play goes a long way in getting them the justice that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Anybody else? Councillor Jarvis, you do have a right to speak again. You're not going to. So we move on to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions?
Carried unanimously, Mr. Mayor.
We now move on to councillors' questions, and these can be found on pages 197 to 198 of your agenda pack. Only you haven't got agenda packs because it's all online. Can I remind councillors there is a total of 30 minutes for questions. Councillors, you're entitled to one supplementary question, but please keep it short. Question done. Councillor Jarvis, would you put your question to Councillor House?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to ask the leader what progress is being made on provision of health services for the residents of the One Horton Heath development, particularly access to GP services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just also note that tonight all the questions to me, that's really unfair. I'd like a bit of equality, please, and some questions for Rupert and from Tonya and from Ian and onwards. No, it's just not. It is not, despite all this bonhomie this evening, which is great to behold, but there we go. Anyway, so in answer to Councillor Jarvis's question, which I very much welcome, council staff have for some time been engaging with the NHS regarding health provision across the wider Bishopstoke, Ferrick and Horton Heath area. We're very much aware that Stokewood surgery has been under pressure for some time. So the council, working with the NHS and the surgery, using existing developer contributions, is delivering a current project to install a purpose-built quad cabin, providing 2 additional clinical rooms within the Stokewood surgery site as an interim measure. The council owns additional land adjacent to the surgery that could be used for health purposes. It's one of several options being explored for the long term as housing development at 1 Horton Heath moves forward. Another would be purpose-built facilities within the local centre at 1 Horton Heath. This would be a better solution from the council's perspective, but we're aware that the NHS increasingly prefers to operate from a smaller number of larger sites. So this is all up for discussion as the local centre and wider site plans are developed over the next couple of years. But to give the reassurance to Councillor Jarvis, we're very much on the case. Interim solution happening, long-term solution will be worked through as part of the 1 Horton Heath plans.
Councillor Jarvis, do you have a supplementary question? We'll move on to question 2. Councillor Broomfield, will you put your question to
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me? Good. I must apologise for using the word total twice in a very short sentence. That's very bad English. I am sorry. In the 2022-23 accounts, it was reported that a total of 17 staff received a total of sum of £805,000 in separation agreements. Could you tell us whether any of, if so, how many of these received non-disclosure agreements or NDAs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly well done, Councillor Broomfield, on picking up the double total. That's absolutely right. The syntax, well, there's a teacher just up from you who can give you marks on that one. The simple answer is actually really simple, which is none. I recognise that sometimes when I give one-word answer, people think he's trying to get out of something. But it's really, really simple. The answer is none. So no NDAs.
Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Bruce? Move on to question 3. Councillor Tidridge, would you put your question to Councillor House?
Thank you. I've got a lot of words, but I'll speak quickly. If this is effectively a supplementary to last council's question, can the leader, as Cabinet Lead for Planning, please update members with progress that has been made by the council since November's full council to address bringing the allotments of Brickhill Lane off Bowlake Gardens into use? I've had many queries, including one from a Bowlake Gardens resident who's been telling me how she moved into her house hoping to be able to take an allotment 5 years ago. She feels very let down by not being able to do so. Also, please can members be updated with progress on transferring the allotments at Sewell Drive, also in Bishopstoke. I believe that there is already a waiting list held by Bishopstoke Parish Council for both sites. Both sites lie unused, and as I mentioned at the last full council meeting, there have been an instance of vandalism and antisocial behaviour. This is so disappointing on sites that should be valuable assets for the community, not liabilities. Developers must be held to account for these facilities that they committed to when getting planning permission to build housing estates. And more importantly, residents must be able to use them as soon as the development is complete, if not before. 5 years after moving in is surely not considered acceptable. Proposed actions and deadlines for delivery for both sides would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think probably Councillor Kinlock could have stood up and asked a similar set of questions, or Councillor Curl, about issues at Borley Park. These issues are desperately frustrating. And I was talking to Councillor Corbyn only a few days ago about a site which we thought hadn't been adopted by the County Council. It turns out it just has been adopted, but that's like 15 years after the homes were built. So we really do appreciate that these issues are really, really frustrating. I know that in this case, the local area committee and ward councillors are being kept up to date as much as possible. Staff are continuing to engage. Engage is probably a nice word for the engagement. But staff continue to engage with developer Vistry at Bowlake Gardens, and the outstanding matters of the repair of the allotment building and woodland tree survey have now been completed. A key matter that remains outstanding is the submission of a drainage verification report. This gets techie quickly. This is essentially confirmed that the public open space and on-site sustainable drainage systems are correctly installed. Planning enforcement are now working. That's the key bit. Planning enforcement are now working with Vistry to address this matter. A final deadline of 2 weeks for receipt of this report have been set, after which the council will pursue a split transfer to progress the transfer of the allotments and building independent of the open space play area and woodland. Staff are also liaising with Bellway, the developer at Silver Drive, and are in negotiations regarding the final outstanding matter. And I'm advised that the draft transfer is agreed, and that once this outstanding matter is concluded, staff expect to complete the transfer promptly. How you can be prompt after 5 years, I'm not quite sure, but you get the picture, I think, of our intention, even if it's not always the other side's intention. I've also been provided by a report from Kitty, the lead local area manager, that sets out the actions that have been taken and are being taken by the council to prevent the delays on the delivery of historic sites occurring in the future. And this will inform future discussions with council. We need to try and find a way where we are not always included in the Section 106 agreement, or at least the Section 106 agreement is also signed by the parish councils, so that transfers can go straight from the developer to the parish council, but still retaining our teeth to act in a legal way if we necessarily need to, because some of the parish councils don't have the resource to get tough with developers. This has become an increasing problem over recent years. If we go back a decade or two ago, it was normal for these things to be just routine, simple and straightforward. Developers increasingly are reluctant to complete transfers because it requires work once they finish selling the site off. And keeping their attention live on these projects is a real challenge. I think I can look around almost any council who's had development in their wards in the last few years, except for where the development has been run by East Borough Council, of course, and they would share some similar experiences with late adoptions, late delivery of play areas, late delivery of fencing, late delivery of country parks, late delivery of this, that and the other. It's not good enough, and it's one of many reasons why we're taking a more activist intervention approach in housing delivery, because we need to help kick the system to deliver things better for our local community, because 5 years after you've moved in is just simply not good enough.
Thank you.
We move on to question 4. Councillor Broomfield, could you put your question to Councillor House?
Thank you again. We know from Ernst & Young's last report that more than one whistleblower came forward. Were any whistleblowers in receipt of separation agreements?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the one question where I don't like the answer, but it's the answer that's technically correct, and so it's the right answer to give. We have an overriding duty to protect the identity of whistleblowers where they happen, otherwise they wouldn't blow the whistle. So I can't actually answer this question either positively or negatively, as given the small number of whistleblowers and the small number of separation agreements at any time, giving any answer could aid in identifying a whistleblower. That's not an ideal answer, but it's factually correct, and it does what it says on the tin, which is to protect the whistleblowing process. What I can confirm is that this is simply because the council values whistleblowers and does have an overriding duty to protect their anonymity and their interests. I hope Councillor Broomfield will take that answer in the spirit which it's meant. I'm not trying to avoid anything. I just want to make sure that we keep the audit system working properly, and that encourages giving staff and partners and contractors and councillors, for that matter, the ability to raise their hands quietly in private if they find something isn't as they think it should be.
Councillor Broomfield, do you have a supplementary question? Question 5. Councillor Broomfield, I've got one more question.
Thank you. Still on the subject then, obviously, of whistleblowers. I understand the council's whistleblowing policy is under review. As members only heard by Ernst & Young that whistleblowers have been operative, if that's the right word, will a new policy ensure that members are notified, obviously privacy willing, notified of any future such whistleblowing occurrences?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a good opportunity. I thank Councillor Broomfield for the question to explain the process, because it's important that people do understand the process. And the whistleblowing policy has been reviewed, and that was reported to the recent Audit and Resources Committee, who I think noted the progress and noted the new policy. So the process is that for any unplanned audit investigation, such as resulting from whistleblowing, the Chief Internal Auditor will, as a matter of course, will notify the Chair and Vice Chair of A&R. And once the review investigation is complete, the Chief Internal Auditor will report findings to the committee where appropriate. If that sounds not quite detailed enough, the rationale is as follows. Whistleblowing matters are very much an important part of any accountable organisation, as we are. But we do need to be aware that the internal audit team has to be careful about the timing of any public reporting, as early public disclosure could hinder or impair an investigation. It's a bit like when the police investigate things. They keep things back initially because if they release too much into the public domain, that could stop them being able to do their job and could potentially jeopardise successful prosecutions. So the stance we've taken has always been to report when work is complete and the conclusion drawn. The regular updates are provided to the Chair and Vice Chair throughout the review. And this was the process that was used with the recent whistleblowing allegations last year and the findings that were reported to the committee in December. As an employer, the Council's legal duty is to protect the disclosure so that there's no risk of any identification of the disclosure that can be discovered through what's been reported. We clearly want to encourage appropriate whistleblowing, so we need to consider that staff may be less likely to come forward and report a concern if it's widely shared, fearing their identity could be discovered. So the process is there. It's a bit retrospective, but for probity purposes, the Chair and Vice Chair are kept informed during the course of that process, albeit they then can't disclose that.
Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, if I may. Just very briefly, would the independent members of A&R be involved in the discussions with the Chair, Vice Chair and Internal Auditor on any whistleblowing matters?
It wouldn't as a matter of routine, but how we handle individual complaints and individual issues is something which we can make bespoke to those issues. So if it turned out there was particular expertise that was held by one of those new members, then that would be an appropriate thing to consider. But the context is really important, which is that's not for debate and it's not for wider sharing, because the whole point is to protect the identity of the whistleblower.
That completes the questions, and we move on to resolved items for noting and questions only. Councillor House, will you please move that the items listed in section 17 of the agenda be placed before Council for noting and questions?
I'll move the whole lot, Mr. Mayor.
And is there a seconder? Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions, not even to the whole lot. Right. So we move on to a vote. All those in favour of noting all the items? Those against? Any abstentions?
Carried, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, thank you. That now concludes the meeting. The next meeting will take place on Monday the 20th of May, and that will be mayor making and the AGM, and it'll be back here at the point. May I take this opportunity to wish those standing for election good luck, and those standing down, I'd like to thank for their services. Thank you.